My name is Natalie Brooks. I'm 32 years old, and for 7 years I worked at Holloway Events, one of Chicago's most successful luxury event companies. At 2:17 in the morning, 3 days before the biggest hotel opening our company had ever handled, our stage supply went bankrupt. By sunrise, the lighting system was missing, a critical permit had not been approved, and the keynote speaker was threatening to walk away. My boss, Grant Holloway, was on vacation. He did not answer a single call, so I spent the next 40 hours doing what I had done for 7 years. I fixed everything. The Sterling Grand opened on time. 800 guests filled the ballroom. The press called the event flawless. Then Grant arrived, stepped onto the stage and thanked everyone for trusting his leadership. He never mentioned my name. The next morning, he called me into his office. His niece was sitting in my chair. Grant handed me a termination agreement and said the company was restructuring. Then he looked me in the eye and said something I will never forget. "Sterling Grand hired Holloway Events, Natalie. They didn't hire you." I looked at the contract lying on his desk. Grant had signed it 3 years earlier. He had clearly never read the section that mattered most, because my name was not only on the company payroll, it was written into the $4 million agreement he had just violated. By Friday afternoon, Grant still had his title, his office, and the company bearing his name. What he no longer had was the client he fired me for saving. From the outside, Holloway Events looked polished. Our office occupied 2 floors of a glass building near the Chicago River. The lobby had marble floors, framed magazine covers, and photographs of Grant beside celebrities, hotel executives, and local politicians. Clients saw elegance. Employees saw exhaustion. Grant was brilliant at selling confidence. He could walk into a room knowing almost nothing about a project and convince everyone he had already solved it. Then he would leave the room and hand the problem to someone else. Usually, that person was me. I started there when I was 25. My first title was Client Services Assistant, which sounded more important than it was. I answered emails, carried garment bags, tracked seating charts, and learned how quickly a beautiful event could collapse because of one missing signature or one late delivery. I stayed because I was good at the part nobody photographed. I remembered which ballroom had unreliable power outlets, which vendor always promised more than he could deliver, and which executive became difficult when she had not eaten. Within 3 years, I was managing corporate events. By my 5th year, I was handling the accounts Grant was most afraid to lose. Sterling Grand Hotels was the largest of them. Their restored Chicago property was supposed to become the chain's flagship. The opening would include investors, journalists, city officials, executives, and 800 invited guests. If the event succeeded, Holloway Events would continue managing Sterling Grand openings and conferences for years. If it failed, millions of dollars in future business could disappear. Grant liked to call Sterling Grand his account. He had attended 4 planning meetings in 18 months. I attended every other one. I knew the guest list, the floor plan, the vendor contracts, the security schedule, the menu changes, and the emergency routes. I also knew Evelyn Price, Sterling Grand's Vice President of Brand Strategy. She trusted me enough to tell me when something was wrong. That was why she called me at 2:17 in the morning. "Natalie," she said, "tell me you already know." Those are 6 words nobody in my profession wants to hear. Our staging company had filed for emergency bankruptcy less than an hour earlier. Their warehouse was locked. Their employees had been sent home. The lighting equipment, sound system, backdrop, and custom platform we had paid for were sitting behind a legal seal. The opening was 70 hours away. "I'll handle it," I told her. I did not know how yet, but telling a frightened client that you are also frightened has never solved anything. I called Grant first. No answer. I called again, then sent a message marked urgent. He had left for a resort in Arizona 2 days earlier, claiming he needed to clear his head before the big launch. I later learned he was playing golf. Mia Torres answered on the first ring. Mia was 26 and had worked under me for 18 months. She was smart, organised, and still young enough to believe hard work would always be noticed. "Are we in trouble?" she asked. "We're in motion," I said. Trouble sounds permanent. Motion means you can still change direction. By 3 a.m, Mia was calling local rental companies. I was contacting union crews, hotel security, and every production manager I knew. At 7:30, Mia entered the office carrying coffee and a folder. "The permit office emailed," she said. A temporary occupancy permit for part of the ballroom had been submitted under the wrong floor designation. Sophie Holloway had handled it. Sophie was Grant's 28-year-old niece. She had joined the company 4 months earlier with the title of Strategic Development Manager, even though she had never managed an event. Grant said she brought fresh perspective. What she mostly brought was confidence without experience. When I asked her about the permit, she blamed the hotel. I checked her email history. The correct floor plan had been attached. Sophie had renamed the files, chosen the wrong one, and submitted it without checking. I did not have time to argue. I drove downtown with revised documents, engineering certifications, and a letter from Sterling Grand's legal department. After 3 hours outside a city office, I secured an emergency inspection. Every time I solved one problem, another appeared. That is what large events are really like. Not one disaster, 100 small failures waiting to become visible at the same time. Grant finally returned my call at 11:30. His voice was relaxed. "I saw your messages," he said. "Everything under control?" I stood in the ballroom while electricians lifted replacement lighting into the ceiling. "We lost the staging company, nearly lost the permit, and almost lost the keynote speaker." There was a pause. "But we didn't?" "Not yet." "Good. Keep me updated." Then he hung up. He did not ask whether we needed help. He only wanted confirmation that the problem would not reach him. The next afternoon, the inspector approved the ballroom. The stage arrived 6 hours before doors opened. The final lighting fixture was installed while the communications team tested the press microphones. At 5:45, I stood behind the ballroom and listened to the first guests enter. The room looked exactly as it had in the renderings. Walnut panels glowed beneath warm lighting. The stage framed the Sterling Grand logo. Music filled the space at precisely the right volume. Nobody entering that room knew how close they had come to seeing an empty ballroom. Evelyn found me near the service doors. "You did it," she said. "We did it." She looked toward Mia. "No," Evelyn said quietly. "You did this." For a few seconds, I allowed myself to feel proud. Then Grant arrived. He wore a dark tuxedo and walked into the ballroom as if he had been supervising the event all week. He greeted Evelyn, shook hands with the hotel president, and posed for photographs beneath the logo. When the opening remarks began, Grant stepped onto the stage. I stood near the back wall with Mia. He thanked Sterling Grand for its trust. He praised the vendors. He congratulated his leadership team. Then he smiled and said, "This is what happens when experienced leadership refuses to accept failure." The room applauded. Grant never said my name. Mia looked at me, furious. I shook my head. Not here. Not tonight. The client was happy. The event was working. I told myself that was enough. I had spent 7 years telling myself versions of the same thing. The work matters more than the credit. The client matters more than the title. Loyalty is eventually rewarded. By midnight, the final guest had left. Mia and I stayed to review invoices and supervise teardown. Grant left after the photographs. As I finally walked out of the hotel, the sun was rising over the buildings. I had not slept in nearly 2 days. But the opening had succeeded. The client was safe. The contract was safe. And I believed my job was safe. I thought being ignored on that stage was the worst thing Grant planned to do to me. The next morning, I walked into the office and found Sophie sitting in my chair. My coffee mug had been moved to the corner. The frame photograph of my mother had been turned face down beside a stack of folders. For a second, I wondered whether I had walked into the wrong office. Then Sophie looked up. "Oh," she said, "you're here." Not good morning, not congratulations, just surprised that I had returned. "What are you doing at my desk?" She glanced toward Grant's office. "He wants to see you." The folders in front of her were mine: Sterling Grand schedules, vendor contacts, budget summaries, the emergency notes Mia and I had created during the opening. Sophie had already begun reviewing them. Grant's assistant appeared in the hallway. "Natalie, he's ready." I entered Grant's office. He was standing beside the windows with a cup of coffee, looking as rested as I felt exhausted. "Close the door," he said. On the table between us was a thin folder with my name printed across the front. "What is Sophie doing in my office?" "We're making organisational changes." "Today?" "There's never a perfect time for restructuring." Grant sat down. "The company is moving in a new direction. We need people who understand where the industry is going." "I just saved your largest event." Grant opened the folder. Inside was a termination agreement, a severance offer, and a non-disclosure document. The company was offering me 4 weeks of salary. 4 weeks after 7 years. The agreement required me to waive any claim against Holloway Events and prohibited me from discussing company operations, client relationships, or compensation practices. My employment would end immediately. My access to company systems had already been disabled. Then I reached the compensation section. My Sterling Grand performance bonus was not included. The bonus was worth almost $30,000. It had been promised in writing if the hotel opening met the agreed standards. It had done more than meet them. Where is my bonus? Bonuses are discretionary. Not this one. The company has not completed its review. The client approved the event last night. This is exactly why you need to read the agreement carefully. I am reading it. The non-disclosure terms were broad enough to prevent me from explaining why I had been fired. Grant could control the story while I remained silent. "So this is because Sterling Grand trusts me?" "This is because you have difficulty separating client service from ownership." "I never claimed to own the client." "You behave as if every decision has to go through you." "Because you do not attend the meetings." His face hardened. "I founded this company." "And I kept your largest client from leaving." Grant stood. "Sterling Grand hired Holloway Events," he said. "They did not hire Natalie Brooks." He believed the sentence ended the argument. I looked toward the cabinet where we stored signed agreements. 3 years earlier, after another project nearly failed, Evelyn had insisted on rewriting part of the Sterling contract. Grant had complained about the legal fees and signed the revised agreement without reading more than the payment schedule. I remembered one section clearly. "Has Sterling Grand approved the transition?" I asked. Grant frowned. "They do not approve our staffing decisions." "That is not what I asked." "They'll be informed when necessary." "Have you told Evelyn I am no longer managing the account?" "Sophie will handle that." Grant mistook my silence for defeat. "If you cooperate, I am willing to provide a positive reference." "Cooperate how?" "You transfer your contacts, document the remaining obligations, and make yourself available for questions during the next 2 weeks. You are firing me today, but you want me to train Sophie after I leave." "It is a professional courtesy." "No, a professional courtesy would have been waiting until after I slept." His mouth tightened. "This attitude confirms that we are making the right decision." I placed the folder on his desk. "I am not signing anything today. The severance offer expires at 5. "Then it expires." "You do not want to turn this into a legal problem." "I am acting like someone who has learned not to sign documents written by the person firing her." For the first time, Grant looked uncertain. Then he pressed a button on his desk phone. His assistant entered with a security guard. I had worked in that office for 7 years. I had stayed overnight during launches and spent birthdays there. Now I was being escorted out as though I had stolen something. Mia stood when she saw the guard. "What's happening?" "Natalie is leaving the company," Grant's assistant said. "After last night?" Mia asked. "Go back to work," Grant said from his doorway. I gave Mia a small nod. Not because Grant deserved obedience, because I did not want her fired beside me. Sophie had already packed my personal belongings into 2 boxes. My mother's photograph, my coffee mug, a pair of heels. 7 years reduced to what I could carry to the elevator. On the way out, I surrendered my phone and security badge. They had planned every step. My access, my office, my files, my replacement. The only thing they had not planned was what would happen when Sterling Grand learned the truth. Outside, I placed the boxes in my car and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. I was exhausted, humiliated, and angry enough to shake. But beneath the anger was a question. I opened my personal laptop and searched through employment records I'd legally saved. After several minutes, I found the executed Sterling Grand agreement. I scrolled to section 14, Key Personnel. There it was, my full name, Natalie Brooks. The agreement required me to remain the lead account director. Any replacement needed Sterling Grand's written approval and a 30-day transition period. Grant had fired me without either one. The client had the right to suspend payments or terminate the contract immediately. Grant had signed a $4 million agreement. He just had no idea what he had promised inside it. I saved copies of the relevant pages and called an employment attorney named Rebecca Lynn. I had met her at a charity event 2 years earlier. When I explained what happened, she asked one question. "Did you contact the client after your termination?" "Not yet." "Good. Do not solicit them. Do not ask them to leave Holloway Events. Send only a neutral departure notice." I wrote a short email to Evelyn. I confirmed that I was no longer employed by Holloway Events and would no longer serve as Sterling Grand's lead account director. I thanked her for the opportunity to support the opening and directed future questions to the company. No accusation, no warning, no mention of the contract. Just the truth. Evelyn called less than 4 minutes later. "What happened?" "I was terminated this morning." "After last night?" "Yes." "Who is taking over?" "Sophie Holloway." Evelyn exhaled slowly. "Did we approve that?" "That is a question for Grant." Her voice changed. It was no longer the voice of a client asking for information. It was the voice of an executive who knew something had been hidden from her. "Did Grant tell you he had spoken to me?" "No." "Do not delete any records related to your role," she said. "Our legal team may contact you." An hour later, a courier delivered a cease and desist letter from Holloway Events. Grant's attorney accused me of interfering with client relationships and misusing confidential information. According to Grant, I was a disgruntled former employee attempting to damage the company after a lawful restructuring. Rebecca read the letter and laughed once. Not because it was funny, because it was predictable. "He is scared," she said. At 3 that afternoon, Sterling Grand suspended all new work until the staffing change could be reviewed. The next payment, worth more than $300,000, was placed on hold. Grant called me 3 times, then left a message. "Natalie, this has gone far enough. Whatever you told Evelyn, you need to correct it. You resigned this morning after refusing the transition terms." I forwarded the recording to Rebecca. I had not resigned. Grant knew I had not resigned, but now he had said it in a recorded message. The more pressure he felt, the more careless he became. At 9:14 that night, my phone rang from an unfamiliar number. Mia whispered my name. "Grant told everyone you quit," she said. "He said you became unstable after the event." "That never happened." "I know." Her voice shook. Then she said, Natalie, he has been planning this for weeks. Mia had found a personnel file with my name on it while transferring my Sterling documents to Sophie. The file contained a negative performance review and a written warning dated weeks before the opening. The warning claimed Grant had met with me on a day I had spent 6 hours at Sterling Grand with Evelyn and the hotel's executive chef. The meeting could not have happened. There was also an email Grant had sent to Sophie 9 days before the opening. "Once Natalie gets us through the opening, we will not need her anymore," it said. "Make sure you have copies of every vendor contact, client preference, template, and budget note before then." Grant had not simply planned to fire me. He had designed the appearance of a legitimate transition before the event was finished. He wanted my files copied, my history rewritten, my replacement installed, and my silence purchased for 4 weeks of salary. Rebecca said the evidence could support claims involving unpaid compensation, falsified employment records, and retaliation, so I waited. Grant did not. Holloway Events formally told Sterling Grand that I had voluntarily resigned after refusing a transition. The letter described me as uncooperative and emotionally volatile. Almost every sentence was false. The next day, Grant increased my severance offer from 4 weeks to 12 and offered half my bonus. In exchange, I had to confirm in writing that I had resigned voluntarily and that Holloway Events had satisfied all obligations involving Sterling Grand. He wanted me to sign a lie that would repair another lie. I refused. Late that evening, Mia learned that Grant had asked the human resources manager to replace the creation dates on my performance documents. The manager refused. Then Grant asked Sophie to upload new versions from her account. He was no longer just defending the story. He was editing evidence after Sterling Grand requested it. Rebecca sent a preservation notice requiring Holloway Events to retain all emails, file histories, employment records, and compensation documents involving me, Grant, Sophie, Mia, and the Sterling account. Deleting or altering anything after that notice could create consequences far beyond losing one client. Grant had spent days trying to make the truth look complicated, but lies become dangerous when they need constant maintenance. By Friday morning, Sterling Grand had frozen every active project with Holloway Events. The next payment was supposed to cover payroll, vendor balances, and deposits for 3 full conferences. Without it, the company had less than 2 weeks before cash became a serious problem. Grant liked to say the company was healthy. What he meant was the company looked healthy as long as nothing stopped moving. Now Sterling Grand had stopped. Sophie called again. This time, I answered with Rebecca on the line. She told me the shared files did not match commitments I had made with Evelyn. A private dinner had no confirmed florist. Travel journalists had been promised transportation nobody had booked. "Help me," Sophie said. "What exactly are you offering?" Rebecca asked. "I assumed Natalie would want to protect the client." That was Grant's language. For 7 years, he had used my loyalty as a weapon against me. Stay late because the client matters. Do work outside your role because the client matters. Accept less credit because the client matters. Now they were trying to use the same argument after taking away my job. "I do care about the client," I said. "That is why I told them the truth." "If this company loses Sterling, people will lose their jobs," Sophie said. For a moment, guilt pressed against me. Then Rebecca answered, "Your uncle should have considered those employees before falsifying Natalie's records and breaching the contract." Sophie hung up. Later that afternoon, Grant called from another number. "I am offering you a consulting arrangement," he said. 2 weeks. You stabilise the account and complete the transition. "What happens to my position?" "You would be a consultant." "My bonus?" "A separate matter." "My employment record?" "We are not discussing that." He was not asking me to return. He was asking me to clean up the evidence of my own removal. No restored position, no admission, no correction, just 2 more weeks of work so Sophie could keep the account afterward. "You waited until the event was over to fire me," I said. "Now you want me back until the transition is over." "This is business." "No, this is the same plan with a different deadline." His voice hardened. "Without Holloway Events, you have no platform, no staff, and no clients." There it was. Grant believed I mattered only inside the structure he owned. "Then you should not need me to save it," I said. He went silent. "If Sterling leaves, I will make sure every agency in Chicago knows what kind of employee you are." "Please put that in writing." He hung up. Less than 20 minutes later, Evelyn called. Sterling Grant's review had uncovered problems beyond the staffing violation. Holloway Events had billed the hotel for leadership hours Grant had never performed. Sophie had been listed as an account strategist months before she joined planning meetings. Several emergency charges appeared to include undisclosed markups. I had not known about the billing. Grant controlled final invoices. Evelyn told me Sterling Grant had decided to terminate the contract and review all unpaid charges. Future events would be placed with temporary vendors while the hotel opened a formal bidding process. I expected satisfaction. What I felt was grief. Not for Grant, for the people who had trusted a company that never deserved their loyalty. For the version of myself who believed saving Grant's reputation would eventually make him value mine. The next morning, Holloway Events announced that Sterling Grant had unexpectedly changed strategic direction. There was no mention of the contract breach, the false resignation, or the billing review. Grant requested an emergency meeting with Sterling Grant's legal team and asked me to attend. His message said my presence was necessary to clarify my voluntary departure. Rebecca read the sentence and smiled without humour. "He is still going to say you resigned. After everything they found? He does not need the story to be true. He only needs it to survive one more meeting." The meeting took place Monday morning on the 32nd floor of Sterling Grant's headquarters. Rebecca arrived with me. Grant sat at one end of the table beside Holloway Events attorney, Daniel Pierce. Sophie sat on his other side. Evelyn entered with Sterling Grant's general counsel and 2 members of the finance team. Grant stood. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," he said. "I believe there has been a serious misunderstanding." Evelyn took her seat. "I do not believe there has. Nobody offered coffee. Nobody exchanged small talk." Sterling Grant's attorney summarised the issues: breach of the key person clause, conflicting statements about my departure, and irregularities in the opening invoices. Grant listened with his hands folded. He looked calm. That was one of his greatest skills. He could sit in front of evidence and behave as though confidence might change what it meant. "Natalie's departure was unfortunate," he said, "but it was not a breach. She refused a planned transition and left." "That is not what happened," I said. Daniel raised one hand. "My client is speaking." Rebecca answered before I could. "And your client is misrepresenting the termination." Grant said I had been offered a revised role. Rebecca placed the termination agreement on the table. "Show us the option allowing Miss Brooks to remain employed." Daniel did not touch it. Grant shifted his attention to Evelyn. Holloway Events remained fully capable of servicing the account. Rebecca then explained that I had been escorted from the building less than an hour after being terminated. My access had been disabled before the meeting, and my belongings had already been packed. Grant said I had been offered severance. 4 weeks, I said, in exchange for waiving every claim and remaining silent. He called that standard. Rebecca slid an accounting record across the table. Then why was Natalie's bonus transferred into an executive retention fund before the hotel opening? Grant's eyes moved to the document. Sophie looked down. Evelyn's general counsel added that the retention allocation had been included in charges billed to Sterling. Grant's calm expression finally cracked. "This meeting is supposed to address the contract." "It does," Evelyn said. "Your treatment of Natalie affected our account, our invoices, and our confidence in your company." Then Sterling Grant's attorney placed the email on the table. He read it aloud. Once Natalie gets us through the opening, we will not need her anymore. Make sure you have copies of every vendor contact, client preference, template, and budget note before then. Nobody moved. The sentence sounded worse in that room than it had on my screen. Grant looked at Sophie. Where did they get that? I do not know, she whispered. That email is being taken out of context, Grant said. What is the correct context? Evelyn asked. Grant said it was succession planning. He claimed I had resisted training junior employees and made my role too central. I almost admired how quickly he rebuilt the lie. Almost. Then the conference room door opened. Mia walked in with another attorney from Rebecca's firm. Grant's expression hardened. What is she doing here? Mia sat beside me. Her hands trembled when she placed a folder on the table, but her voice was steady. I was asked to explain the records I was ordered to transfer. Grant pointed toward the door. You are still an employee of Holloway Events. Not anymore. I submitted notice this morning. Mia explained how Grant instructed her to copy my files into Sophie's account. She described the false performance review, the written warning dated on a day I was at Sterling Grand, the order to transfer my bonus, and the request to change file dates after Sterling began its review. Grant interrupted twice. The first time, Evelyn's attorney stopped him. The second time, Daniel put a hand on his arm. When Mia finished, Rebecca presented the photograph of the written warning. Grant had claimed he met with me at 3 o'clock on June 4th. Sterling Grand's security records showed I entered the hotel at 9:12 that morning and did not leave until after 5. Evelyn had attended the same meeting. So this disciplinary conversation never happened, she said. It may have been a clerical error, Grant replied. The meeting? I asked. Or the lie? Daniel told me not to editorialize. Grant turned toward me. You think this makes you look loyal? I am not the person who fired someone the morning after she saved $4 million in business. You were an employee. The sentence came out sharper than everything else he had said. Not a defense, a reminder of where he believed I belonged. An employee. Replaceable. Useful until the work was finished. Then invisible. I looked at the signed contract in front of Evelyn. You fired the employee listed on your payroll, I said. You forgot I was the person listed in the contract. Nobody spoke. Grant looked away first. Evelyn closed the binder. Sterling Grand is terminating its agreement with Holloway Events for material breach, misrepresentation, and loss of confidence. Daniel began to object. Evelyn's general counsel continued. All unpaid invoices will remain under review. Sterling Grand reserves the right to recover unsupported charges and any costs resulting from the contract violation. Grant stood. You cannot end a $4 million relationship because one employee is angry. Evelyn did not raise her voice. We are ending it because your company lied about the person we trusted to manage it. For the first time since I had known him, Grant was in a room where nobody was waiting for him to decide what the truth should be. He gathered his papers. This is not over. Rebecca answered calmly. No, the contract is over. The rest is just beginning. Grant walked out. Sophie followed him without looking at anyone. Mia sat beside me, breathing as though she had just finished running. Evelyn crossed the room. I am sorry, she said. I did not ask which part she meant. The firing, the lies, the years she had trusted a company that did not value the person doing the work. Maybe all of it. What happens to the account now? I asked. We will use temporary vendors while we open a competitive bid. She paused. You are welcome to apply. That was not a promise. It was not a gift. And I respected her more for that. I had helped expose why Holloway Events no longer deserved the contract. That did not mean I automatically deserved to inherit it. I would have to build something of my own. For the first time in 7 years, that idea did not frighten me. 3 weeks after the meeting, Holloway Events paid my bonus in full. They corrected my employment record and withdrew the claim that I had resigned. The settlement included confidentiality terms, so I cannot discuss every detail. But Grant never apologised. He signed because his attorney told him the alternative would cost more. That used to bother me. I thought accountability was supposed to include regret. Eventually, I understood that consequences do not require someone's permission to be real. Sterling Grant opened its bidding process 6 weeks later. 4 established agencies submitted proposals. So did I. By then, Mia and I had formed a small company called Brooks and Torres. We had no glass office overlooking the river. We worked from a rented room above a printing shop. Our conference table had a scratch across the middle, and the air conditioner stopped working whenever the temperature rose above 80 degrees. But every person in that room knew why she was there. Mia handled operations. I managed clients and creative strategy. Several vendors agreed to give us reasonable payment terms. Not because I asked them to take sides, because I had always paid them fairly, answered their calls, and treated their emergencies as seriously as my own. For the Sterling proposal, we did not rely on the old contract. We built an entirely new plan. We reduced unnecessary markups, created clearer approval systems, and gave the client direct access to every schedule and vendor payment record. Most importantly, we designed the account so no single employee could become invisible while carrying all the responsibility. When Evelyn called to tell me we had won, I asked her to repeat it. Not because I had not heard her, because I wanted to be certain the moment was real. "We did not choose you because of what happened with Grant," she said. "We chose you because your proposal was better." That meant more to me than being handed the account out of sympathy. I had not inherited Grant's client. I had earned Sterling Grant's business again under my own name. Holloway Events did not disappear. Companies like that rarely collapse in one dramatic moment. They shrink through a series of smaller truths. 2 other clients requested billing reviews. 1 senior manager resigned. Employees began asking questions about bonuses and promotions that had never been documented properly. Sophie left before the end of the year. Grant sold 1 floor of the office and reduced his staff. He continued telling people that Sterling Grant had been stolen from him. That was easier than admitting he had lost it by treating the person protecting it as disposable. A year after my firing, Brooks and Torres managed Sterling Grant's annual leadership conference. At the end of the event, Mia and I stood near the back of the ballroom while the final guests left. It reminded me of the Chicago opening. The lighting, the empty glasses, the quiet that comes after hundreds of people leave a room you spent months preparing. But this time, my name appeared on the production report. Mia's name appeared beside mine. So did the names of every coordinator, technician, designer, and vendor who had helped us succeed. No one stepped onto the stage and accepted credit for work they had not done. For 7 years, I believed loyalty meant making myself impossible to replace. Grant taught me something better. Loyalty does not mean disappearing inside someone else's success. Sometimes it means leaving the room where your work is taken for granted and building one where every name is finally seen.